Well, good morning. All right. This is the part of the show where networking yields to listening. Good morning. I'm Tom Silvestri, the publisher of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and your host today. Glad to have you here. I want to give a shout out for Joan Cross, who's our facility manager, trying to jam as many people from BBB in here as possible with not encouraging the fire marshal to visit. So Joan, thank you for your excellent work. I want to say something. We were a little nervous, and I'm glad we were able to give you the alert about the traffic patterns over here. Those of you who've put on programs and meetings, we now have a new task. Yes, make sure the caterer has been hired, make sure the number of chairs, make sure the technology works, and check with the municipalities to see whether they're paving your road outside first. Although I will say that BBB is 2 for 2. We have 4 roads that form the square around the public square up on the Times-Dispatch. Last year at this time, Tom, you got Franklin Street paid for us. Thank you very much. This year, 3rd Street is now done. What's left is Grace and 3rd. So come on back next year and see which road gets paved. Seriously, thanks for being here. I just want to make a point. Over the weekend, I was in Omaha for the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting, and it's an unusual event. Warren Buffett, who's the chairman for Berkshire Hathaway, celebrated his 50th year at the helm of that company. During the unusual shareholders meeting where he and Mr. Buffett's 84, his sidekick, Charlie Munger, is 91, answered questions from the attendees, which numbered almost 40,000, 20,000 of which were in the CenturyLink auditorium. And they answered questions for over 6 hours from all points of the world. Being a former business editor where annual meetings challenges to stay awake, it was amazing how they modeled their responsibilities of running a publicly traded company by answering all questions. I'm sure that's something that we all do in our own organizations. On the Berkshire Hathaway lanyard, which you had to wear to get in, it of course noted the 50 years. But I'll leave you with something they've tacked on that probably might explain more about Warren Buffett's success. That not necessarily means he's a billionaire, or not necessarily means he's a very, very smart business person, but he has a mission that crosses over between business and philanthropy that I want to leave you with and want you to think about as you have occasion to hear from an array of just outstanding speakers today to kind of do a gut check on what we all do here to help our community. But on this lanyard, it says shareholder. It says celebrating 50 years. It has the name of the company, and it has this tagline that may be the ultimate definition of public trust. Predictable partnership. Celebrating 50 years of a predictable partnership. With so much unknown and so much chaos in the world, I would think that if that was all of our missions, we'd be here next year smiling as the road outside got paved. Have a great program and welcome to the Richmond Times-Dispatch. I'll turn it over to the master of ceremonies, whose jokes I haven't stolen, Mr. Mark. Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm grateful to be part of the BBB. It's my side job. An amazing staff at the Better Business Bureau, Barbara, Tom, and all the staff. Just so much thanks for putting us all together here this morning. It's my honor to introduce our speaker, our keynote, Art Taylor. How are you? It's good to have you back. Last year was amazing, and I know this year is going to be better than that, and it's hard to believe. If you haven't met Art, Herman Art Taylor is President and Chief Executive Officer of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. As head of the Alliance, Mr. Taylor oversees all aspects of the organization of the organization's work, which includes setting standards for soliciting organizations, evaluating charities in relation to these standards, publishing the Wise Giving Guide, assisting local Better Business Bureau charity review programs, promoting charity accountability, and providing a variety of materials on informed giving to individual, institution, and business donors. Excuse me. Since his appointment in July 2001, Mr. Taylor's leadership has increased the Alliance's number of reports from 250 to over 1,400 of the nation's most asked about nationally solicited charities. These reports complement more than 10,000 reports on local charities produced by local Better Business bureaus. In addition, the organization introduced and implemented the accredited charity seal used by national and local charities to indicate adherence to the comprehensive BBB standards for charity accountability. It is estimated that more than 1 billion impressions of the charity seal exist in the public domain on solicitations, websites, and other charity publicity, giving donors a clear, concise, and accessible means of knowing whether an organization meets the BBB Wise Giving standards. Mr. Taylor is a respected and sought-after voice in the nonprofit sector on charity accountability and transparency issues. A regular and featured speaker at charity gatherings, he has testified before the U.S. House and Senate committees on ethical behavior and trustworthiness of charities and appears frequently in broadcast news and print media. Most recently, Mr. Taylor presented on ethics at the Association of Fundraising Professionals 2015 annual conference in Baltimore, Maryland. Mr. Taylor has served on numerous nonprofit boards throughout his career. He was vice chair of Independent Sector, where he was a board member from 1998 to 2003, and has been a trustee of Franklin and Marshall College since 1993. He is a vestry member and senior warden of Christ Episcopal Church in Clinton, Maryland. A 1980 graduate of Franklin and Marshall College, Mr. Taylor was awarded a doctorate of laws honoris causa by his alma mater in 2002. He acquired his Juris Doctorate from Temple University's James E. Beasley School of Law and was admitted to the Pennsylvania State Bar in 1989. In addition to his substantive and honorary law degrees, and Mr. Taylor, if that wasn't enough, you're also a CPA. It is my pleasure to welcome Art Taylor. This is yours.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lord, I done. Lord, I done. Lord, I done. I done what you told me to do. You told me to sing, and I done that too. I done what you told me to do. You told me to pray, and I done that too. I done what you told me, talking about you, Lord. I done. Lord, I done, Lord. I done. I done what you told me to do. Good morning, Richmond. It's great to be here in town again to spend some time with you to talk about trust and trust in charities. And I want to take a minute just to thank a few people for making this day possible. First, I have to start with Benjamin. Stand up, Benjamin. Benjamin worked like a crazy person to pull this off. Maybe two crazy people. He really put his foot into it to really make sure this came together, and I want to just thank him. Also, she may not be expecting it, but I want to thank Barbara too, Barbara Ho-Miller. Barbara actually was the first person to get me to come here some years ago. And it was her idea to maybe bring me down here, and it's turned into a really great relationship, and I've enjoyed coming back time and time again. But it was your idea at first, so we got to remember where it started. And of course, I have to mention my good friend Tom Gallagher, who, gosh, I mean, he's got to be a pillar in this community. Tom's been doing this stuff now for about 33 years or so, something like that, Tom? You don't remember? 33 years, I'm guessing. And just think about all of the businesses that he's affected, all of the consumers that he's helped in that time. What you guys really don't know, though, is that not only is Tom a pillar in this local community, he has a lot of effect on what goes on in the BBB system nationally. His colleagues in the BBB system really rely on him as a valued voice, and they get very much sage advice from him, and we're very grateful to have him as a colleague. So I wanted to just say that to all of you. Now, I don't want you to worry. I'm not here to preach. And I know from hearing that song, you might be thinking, uh-oh, you know, he's going to do some preaching here. But I'm not a preacher. But there is a connection between that song and what I want to talk about today. I done what you told me to do is a motivating force for many people who contribute to charity. In fact, I come up with about 4 major causes, or 4 major, I would say, motivations that stimulate people to give. One is maybe religious and spiritual. We give because we are from what many believe to be a God who has given us many gifts. And if we are to live in his image or her image, then we should also be giving to others to make sure that they can benefit from those gifts as well. So this whole notion of religion and spirituality for many people is a motivator to get them to give. There are other people who give, though, because of humanitarian reasons. They don't necessarily have a faith driving their giving, but they believe that humans should help humans when they're in need. And so these humanitarian givers pop up when there are major disasters that come about. And they see suffering around the world, and their hearts go out, and they want to give and support these folks so that they can be made whole. Humanitarian givers. There are also people who give, I call them quid pro quo givers. These are people who give because they think they're going to get something in return. I was just talking recently to the gentleman, Brett, who runs the ballet. And I would bet that there are a number of people who support the ballet because they want to see the performances. Nothing wrong with that. And it's great for the ballet because it gets to continue and to thrive because of individuals like that. There are also others, like myself, who grew up in the YMCA, for instance. I support the Y because of what it did for me as a kid. So I'm paying back, okay, an institution that did a lot for me. There are people like that who give because either they got something in return, or they got something before and they want to pay it back, or they imagine that something may happen positive as a result of their gift and they want to pay it forward. And then lastly, there are people who give simply because it feels good. In fact, there's some data that shows that the regions of our brain that stimulate pleasure are affected when we make a donation. There's some scientific data, if you can believe it, that proves that. So those of us who eat a tasty meal and we get pleasure from that, same region is giving. And I'm told that even when you have a good round of sex, that same region of your brain is stimulated. So all of you guys who are thinking you need to go out and get these pills, you really don't need to do that. You just need to give more to charity. Just give more to charity. But the point I'm making is there are all these motivations that drive us to give to charity. And you would think that because we're so motivated to give, that we would want to close the deal by giving to organizations that were indeed trustworthy and worthy of those gifts. But that's not necessarily the case. There's a study, and I should get paid for every time I cite this study, but it's called, Hope Consulting did a study called Money for Good and Money for Good Too. And in this study, it points out that only 30% of donors consider any data, any information at all before they contribute to a charity. Only 30% of the people. And I would argue that of those 30%, very few look at more than simply some information they got from a friend or family member about the organization before they give. Or maybe they might read the solicitation, the appeal that came in. That's about it. So they're not really checking out these organizations. They're not really closing a deal. And that sort of runs counter, in my view, to those motivating factors that drive you to give. If you're giving for religious reasons, shouldn't you also have discernment? I believe discernment is a principle that comes out of religion also. We should know that the things that we're giving to don't turn out to be evil. And how do we know if we don't check it out, if we don't investigate? If we're giving for humanitarian reasons, we should know that the organizations that we're supporting are actually going to help people and not do them harm. And if we're giving because we want to get something in return, let's say we want our name on a building or a plaque because of what we give. We did that because we want to be remembered. Well, if the institution's not going to be around very long because you didn't check it out and they're not really able to deliver on that promise, wouldn't you want to know that up front? And of course, there's nothing worse than the buzzkill that comes from giving to an institution that you support was going to give you pleasure, and in the end, it turned out to be a scam that ran away with your money. So all of those things that motivate us to give should also drive us to check out an organization before we give if we're really going to close the deal. But yet people don't do that. So why is that? And I began to think about why is it that people don't actually check out charities, determine if they're trustworthy before they make their donations. And what I came up with is, well, if you think about trustworthiness, that's a difficult word. It's a very subjective word. It's a word that means different things to different people. What Tom needs in order to trust something may be very different than what I need in order to trust something. And when we think about it in a charity context, what I need to trust a charity, or what one charity even thinks it needs to do in order to be trustworthy, may be very different than what another charity thinks about what it needs to do in order to be trustworthy. And so if trustworthiness is going to be useful, if donors are going to know what to do, we have to put this concept of trustworthiness in some type of frame. We have to frame it in a way that people can actually use it. And I would submit to you that there are lots of people out there that are working on that. We're one, the BBB Wise Giving Alliance and the BBBs have constructed a frame. The AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, have constructed a frame. The independent sector, with its Principles for Good Governance and Ethical Practices, have constructed a frame. And by the way, all of these frames sort of fit together under what I consider to be 4 major boxes that determine if an organization is trustworthy. What are those 4 boxes? Well, the first box is how an organization is governed. An organization should be governed well. It should have a board that actually meets, a board that actually has a requisite number of people with diverse ideas and opinions. They should be independent. They should be free of conflicts of interest. And they should be really serious about the mission of the organization and make sure that they're taking steps to protect that organization and to safeguard it and to see that it grows. Great governance is a pillar of trust. Another area happens to be finances. Now, I'll talk about finances, and it sort of goes back to this whole notion of why people don't look at information before they trust, and how ineffective people seem to be in order to determine if a charity's trustworthy. They tend to rely on the second box, but only a piece of it. They rely on this box, finances, but they focus on what? Financial ratios. They focus on the extent to which a charity spends or does not spend money on overhead. And for those of you who were here last year, I'm not going to repeat my speech that I gave on the overhead myth. But there is a problem that we have in the charity sector with an over-reliance on this simple metric of how much money a charity spends on programs. What we're actually doing is crowding out a charity's ability to operate by over-focusing on that. And I'm not going to get into that too much today. But there's a page on a web called theoverheadmyth.com. And I commend it to you because there's a couple of letters that we've written to the nonprofit sector about how to deal with this question of overhead and over-reliance on it as a metric. But in addition to the metric of those financial ratios, and charity should spend reasonable sums on overhead, there are also other indices of trustworthiness that go to the financial aspect. Is an organization of a certain size actually getting independent audits? Do they craft a budget every year and compare the actual results to those budgeted amounts? Do they put out financial information in a way that people can understand and make decisions? Do they have people overseeing the finances of the organization? So in addition to achieving certain financial metrics, organizations should have certain practices around their finances that make them reliable and trustworthy. Third box. Third box has to do with the materials and information that organizations put out. Organizations should be putting out truthful and accurate information about their programs and operations. And their fundraising appeals really need to be truthful and not misleading. Because for most people, the only information they'll ever see about your organization is the information contained in those appeals. And so if we're not telling the truth in the appeals, we're really going to be misleading people. So truthful information. And there should be an annual report that's prepared every year that talks about who's on your board, what type of program did you run this year, what is your mission? And there should be some selected financial information in the annual report. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. When we talk about annual reports, a lot of people think about, oh, it must be this slick, glossy publication. No, it could be written on 3 sheets of paper, posted to the website, and handed out to anybody who wants it, as long as it contains the requisite information. So informational materials is the third one. The fourth one, and I could give a whole speech about this, which I won't, but I'm going to get into a little bit, is effectiveness or impact. Now watch out. How many of you actually measure impact? Wow, that's a lot of hands in the air. I want to ask the question again, though, and say, are you measuring the extent to which your program is moving society forward? Or are you measuring inputs and outputs? Just saying. There are lots of organizations that say they're measuring impact, but what they're really measuring are inputs and outputs. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think we get into our heads that we have to be this institution that proves that we have changed the world in some way. And that's great if you can do it. And I happen to believe that all charitable organizations that are working hard are impacting the world in some way. It's just hard to measure it. For instance, my favorite, and I talked about this last year, I'm into job training programs because I think what they can do to transform people's lives are really great, right? So if I'm a job training organization, my inputs are going to be what? Classroom, instructors, curriculum, the things that it takes in order to conduct a job training program, the facility. My outputs are going to be the classes that we teach. So I can measure what went in, and I can measure how many classes we took. Easy enough to do. I can set goals for those, and I can see how I did in relation to those goals. And I can report those to people. My outcomes are going to be the people who achieved a certification or learned a new job skill as a result of the job training program. I can now say that so many people now have a new employable skill as a result of the job training program. But can I really say and know what the impact of the program is if we define impact as what has this gentleman now done to improve society, or how has society benefited from this job training work? I don't know if I can extend my work in a way that would make it clear to people how the job training program actually moves society. Now, I believe that it did, and it probably has, but proving it is a little difficult. It takes a lot to prove that. So let's get out of our heads about impact, and let's start reporting what we can. We can report inputs, we can report outputs, and we can report outcomes. And for those of us who are lucky enough to be able to report impact, more power to you. Do it. But great organizations are reporting what they can, and they're learning from things that they do, both well and not so well. And one other thing to remember about impact, it's not always looking backwards. We like to say that we did this, so what? People aren't supporting you because of what you did. I mean, that may be an element of it. But what's really inspiring them to come out of their wallets and support you is what you're going to do, what you're planning to do, how you're going to achieve it, where you want to go with your organization. Those are the things that inspire people. And I don't think we talk enough about how the things we did in the past are going to be relating to what we are planning to do in the future. So, those are the 4 areas, the 4 building blocks. What did I say? Governance. I said finances. I said truthful information. And the 4th one was measuring your results and reporting your results. Doing those four things, you have the four pillars of trustworthiness. So why is any of this important? Well, it's important because it lies at the heart, trustworthiness, in my opinion, lies at the heart of everything you do as a charity. It lies at the heart for why you're even in business. You're in business because you're planning to do something and you want to convince people that you're the right people to do it. I would say you're in business for the folk who you're actually here to serve. You know, I started out talking about the donors and the perspective that the donor has and why donors give. And then I went to what charities need to do. But let's talk a little bit about the people that we're here to serve or the causes that we're here to change. That's why we need to be trustworthy. We need to be trustworthy, Tom, because of young women like Cameron. That's why we need to be trustworthy. We need to be trustworthy because there was a young lady here in your community who had a problem. And everybody wanted to push that problem of hers aside. They wanted to tell her that you shouldn't talk about the fact that you're depressed. That's not something that we talk about. We talk about the fact that you might be sad sometime. But when you're out of school for 2 months, unable to get out of bed, you're not sad. You're depressed. And this young lady knew that she had more than sadness and she wanted to do something about it. So what did she do? She sat down and wrote out a plan for how she was going to get other young people to begin talking about what was going on with them. Because she knew she wasn't the only person in the world who was depressed. And she started by running in a race, and this race ultimately took her life. But it also gave her cause new life. As a result of Cameron's life, there are now going to be thousands, hundreds of thousands, and probably millions of young people who aren't afraid to talk about their depression. They're going to be willing to stand up and say, I need help. I need help. And they're going to look to organizations that can help them. And what's important to me is that those organizations be trustworthy. That we can go to them and expect that when the Camerons of the world stand up and say, I need help, that they're not going to be filled with people who are going to line their pockets and run off with the money, but they're actually going to give a serious attempt to help these kids. That's why we have to have trustworthy organizations. That's why we have to all know what we mean when we say trustworthy. That's why you as donors have to do more than open up your pockets and start shoving money at things without having any idea where you're giving it to. That's why. That's why I'm running around the country like a madman preaching this message. It's important. Every dollar that we give to an unscrupulous organization is one less dollar that we can give to an organization that could have helped Cameron. And that's what I want you to think about. As you go about your work every day, what more can you do to prove that you're trustworthy? That's why we do this. And I'll close by saying, if you don't think it's real, just yesterday, there was a charity executive convicted and sent to prison for 3 years for committing a charity fraud. They're out there, folks. And you've got to distinguish yourself from them. You've got to distinguish yourself from them. And I've given you a framework within which to do it. And I've given you donors something to look at in order to know. So thank you very much. Now, I understand we're going to take a short break, and we're going to allow the panelists to come up, and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. Is that right, Benjamin? Yes, sir. Okay. That's okay. So why don't you come up and introduce the panel? Who's going to introduce the panel? Okay. Great. Thank you.